Hey, it's Rod Yates. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode, I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned. And my special guest today is Matt Sorum, former drummer with Guns N' Roses, the Cult and Velvet Revolver. Matt joined Guns N' Roses in time to play on their 1991 Use Your Illusion albums, and at that point, Guns were the biggest rock band in the world. Now, Matt had experienced fame before with the Cult, but stepping into Guns N' Roses was another level altogether. Combine the unresolved issues from his childhood with the sex, drugs and rock and roll that went hand in hand with being in the world's most dangerous rock band, and you had a fiery cocktail that took Matt down a very extreme path of excess. He writes about it all in his new memoir, Double Talkin Jive, which is out now. From his upbringing to his move to Hollywood in search of fame and fortune, from his time with Guns N' Roses, the Cult and Velvet Revolver to the lessons he's learned along the way, there's a lot to unpack as you're about to hear. A great place to start is obviously Double Talkin Jive, which is an amazing book, and it's a warts and all rock and roll memoir in the truest sense of the word. You're very open about your drug use, your sexual exploits, the inner workings of the Cult and Guns N' Roses and Velvet Revolver and all the acts you've been involved with. At what point in the process did you make the decision that you were going to be so open?
Well, I think I've always been that kind of a guy, to my fault at points in my career. I don't know. I mean, I grew up with two older brothers, and, we kind of just said it how it was. And we were always very vocal. And I guess being the youngest of the batch, I was the guy that had to be the loudest a little bit,
Right.
And having the two older brothers. So I guess it kind of started there, and then it formed into maybe what a lot of people might identify me as, an A personality. Meaning, why the hell did I take up drums in the first place?
Right.
It's might go somewhere in hand with the personality of, how I was brought up and where I came from. And then obviously when I got into bands, it was always band collaboration. We all had a little bit of an opinion, and I learned along the way that those opinions sometimes didn't matter. So I'd have to learn to kind of keep my mouth shut. And that was hard because I always kind of be like, hey man, I just was always sort of the guy that just would not really be able to hold it all in. I just wanted to let people know how I was feeling. And like I said, sometimes to my detriment, but that's just how I am.
Yeah, sure. What does it mean then to now have this platform via the book to be open and to express yourself and not have to, I guess, worry about other people's opinions?
Well, I guess when people read the book, they'll look at all the people that I rubbed elbows with, and maybe they think I'm a name dropper. But the reality is I did rub elbows with those people. And, to me, it's that's part of the story. And that part of the story is I'm very grateful and very blessed and very lucky to have been in those environments with all these incredible musicians and artists and the bands I've been in, not including the people I've met along the way. Mm. People always would say to me, I would tell a few stories over a dinner table or a bar or something. They'd be like, Matt, you got to write a book. And I'd be like, oh yeah, because a lot of people would joke, man, you're like Rain Man. You can remember the room numbers. I'm like that story in the book where me and Ian practically burned down the hotel. I still remember the floor it was on. That's 1988.
Yeah.
And I remember the room number was 626. Because I'll never forget it because I kept the room key. And I remember thinking, oh, that's just down the hall from 666. And I remember that's what kept it in my mind. And then it was Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I remember it like it was yesterday. And that was the kind of stuff that for some reason I've been able to retain a lot of that.
Yeah.
And even when I started to write the book, the very interesting thing is we know from the human brain, is there's a big storage bin in there. Mm. And when you start telling one story, all of a sudden all this other stuff kind of reappears. So when I started heading down, navigating, going through my life story, really, all this other stuff came up. It was a very cathartic, emotional ride. And by the time I got to the final edit of the book, we'd gone through it quite a few times because I went, I got to look at my part in a lot of this, and maybe I need to go redirect how I feel about that. I'm not a jaded guy. I'm not resentful, even though at times I'll be like, that could have gone a different way. Mm. But the reality is it didn't. So the process of writing a book is wow, where are you at now? And how are you now? And I'm very happy with where I am now. So
right.
Writing the book was quite a journey.
Were there some uncomfortable memories that you had to confront?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. But like I said, it's all part of the process. We all go through stuff in life, right? And what do you learn from it? What makes you stronger? And what happens to you? And what's the outcome, right, of that? And I think, as you see from the end of the book, I'm a much more spiritual person now. Obviously, I haven't been partying and scallywagging like the inner workings of the book because, I had to go through that to get here. And I think anybody has to go through stuff to get to where they're going. And hopefully they come out the other end a better person.
Sure.
A lot of people don't. A lot of my friends didn't make it. I'm sure you had friends that didn't make it too.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do make it, which I feel like I'm a survivor, and here I am. I've got a wife and a baby now, and my life is a lot different than it used to be.
Yeah,
that's just the stuff you learn along the way, and
yeah,
I feel good about it. I feel good about being able to sort of go back and look at it all. I don't think I was disparaging to anybody. I had to kind of like tell my truth. It's nobody else's fault. It's just sort of like the way it went.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, that seems to be, just even when you say that, there's obviously an element, you're at a place of peace with a lot of what's happened in the past. And you said one of the things you had to do was perhaps think about your role in some of these situations that you faced. Were there revelations that came from that? Things that you perhaps weren't expecting or hadn't thought of prior to writing the book? Yeah,
well, I mean, in the years when I was the most successful was probably when I was really struggling the most, because as we see when we look at people that are in the limelight, and we've seen so many talented people, fall along the way, and some of the greatest artists in the world. I was just the drummer in the band,
Mm.
And there I was trying to navigate it all. And I didn't do that well. I wasn't 100%. Like, if I could, do it all over again, people ask me that. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? I go, nothing. Because it was just, it was the time.
Yeah.
You're in a rock and roll band. What are you supposed to do? Especially Guns N' Roses or the Cult. Bands that grew up on Led Zeppelin and the Who and the Rolling Stones. And that's a textbook. That's like, you do that and then you become this.
Yeah.
And Guns N' Roses especially was that band. And we woke up in the morning, if we woke up or came to, I used to say, we came to, and we would do what we had to do to put on the greatest rock and roll show or create the greatest music. And that had a lot to do with everything that went into it. If that was alcohol infused and drug infused and everything else, and the personalities in the band is what made it great. It was chaos at times, but that chaos created great rock and roll.
Did the alcohol and the drugs, did that fuel the great rock and roll, or was that actually a barrier that you had to overcome to put on great rock and roll performances?
At the time, I felt like I was supposed to be doing it. It was almost like I got on a pirate ship and I'm here to, just throw down in every way imaginable. And we were a gang like that. I don't think there was many nights that we took off as far as the extracurricular activities. And there was a lot going on. It was a wild ride that you felt like you were on, but it's like buckle up, basically. and you're kind of on this ride. You can't get off. If that makes sense.
It does. Well, I mean, when you joined Guns N' Roses, you would have been aware of their reputation by that point as the world's most dangerous rock and roll band. How were you feeling going into it? Were you prepared for what would follow?
I mean, as you can see in the book, in the Cult, I was very comfortable. Here I was in this band. I was very happy. I'm like, oh my God, I'm on a tour bus. I'm on the road.
It's the dream.
Pretty much a drinking band. They weren't a drugging band. They were British, all Brits. So there was a lot of beverages going down. But I remember dabbling in cocaine then, but I just snuck it around. It wasn't like all out. And to be honest with you, I was perfectly happy in that situation. That was an amazing ride being in the Cult. We were at the height of our game in those days. We were playing arenas, and this Guns N' Roses thing came around, and then the train went off the tracks a little bit for me because now I was in the biggest band in the world. People change, the people around you change, and, you're a young guy, and things take over, ego and, monetary things start to happen. Financial things get crazy, and, you're a guy that came to Hollywood with $40, and now you're flying on a private jet. And it's just all surreal. You feel like you're in the movie, Song Remains the Same.
Right.
You're in that movie. And I remember driving up. We played 4 nights at Madison Square Garden, sold out. Me and Duff used to share a limo. And I remember we were driving up that circular thing into the arena. And that was the scene from Song Remains the Same. And I said to Duff, I said, oh my God, this is the scene from when they go like, tour dates tomorrow. Starts with rock and roll, right? I'm like, that's like, here I am, a kid of the 70s. You know, I grew up in the 70s watching those movies. And there I was. And that kind of just, it sparked something in me that was like, oh my God, this is beyond surreal. This is fucking crazy, really. And even looking back at it, and when I wrote the book, and I say this to people, I feel like it was this surreal movie that I look back on, and it was this, like almost like watching somebody else's movie, but you're in it.
Right. Which is, what do you think, when you see footage, you must see footage of the Rock in Rio show, for example. You must see footage from time to time of some of the enormous crowds you played at. Does that also feel like someone else's life? Does that seem surreal?
First of all, I go, what the fuck's going on with that guy's hairdo? Because at the time, you got to remember it's the early 90s, and there's a lot of like extra excess of things in your system. And you look in the mirror and you go, fuck, man, I look good. And you're like, and then you look back at pictures, you're like, what the hell was I thinking? You know? And the Rock in Rio one's the funniest, because when I watched that was my first show. And as you read in the book, I have quite an adventure the night before where I've had my first experience with South American cocaine, you know, and it was, woo. I remember getting in the van and there's Izzy Stradlin next to me, you know, and he's just like, oh shit, this is our new drummer, you know, it's like, so, you know, those experiences and those things, when I look back, and I was like, well, that was a time that we were those guys. And, you know, obviously I came into the band after Appetite, but they went from opening straight to doing arenas and stadiums. And I just happened to be the guy that got that job. I just remember they were very inviting to me. I just felt like a member of that band right away.
Right.
It wasn't like you're a side guy and you're going to ride in that van over there and we're going to ride in this limo. You know, I was just in the club.
Yeah.
You know, there was no like, oh, we're going to do the band photo and you're not in the band photo. It's none of that.
Right.
The band was the band and it was great.
Yeah. You mentioned that that night before the Rock in Rio show. And as I was reading the book and reading of your description of those events and your experiences with cocaine, and there was part of me thinking, this is your first gig in front of 150,000 odd people with Guns N' Roses. This is the first time you've played with the band. What's happening in your head that you think that doing that cocaine prior is a good idea? Was there not a part of you thinking, right, I've really got to be on my game here. I just need to be straight. I need to be sober. I need to nail this. That just doesn't enter your brain at that point.
Yeah, what I realized later, it was based on fear. I was deathly afraid. It was more than I imagined. It was like the Cult, like I said, like the Cult was cool, and I was happy to be in that band. But when I got to the Guns N' Roses, now we're the biggest band in the world. We got to South America. We were numbers 1 through 6 on the charts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We were like, wow, 2 nights sold out at Maracanã Stadium, and we were headliners. We were the guys, right? And then it got scary. And if you read in the book, before the leg of each tour, I would beat myself down. I would almost go on these like benders. And I look back at it now and I go, you know, I was just trying to beat myself down emotionally, to beat the fear out of me. Because I was going into it was like walking into a tornado. I had complete lack of control. There was nothing I could say or do that was going to change the outcome of daily events. So that scared the shit out of me. And that became my way to numb myself. And even my bandmates were like, dude, you know, because we all partied.
Yeah.
But Slash was a guy that could party, drink. He had a few nights where it got a bit too much and we'd be like, uh-oh. But Duff, same thing. Axl was very professional. Axl called us out quite a few times. And we'd have band meetings and sit us down and be like, look, this is out of control, you guys. If it was affecting the show and stuff started happening musically, Axl was like on us, man. And he never partied like we did. His thing was getting out there and putting on the best performance. He would drink a little champagne and he would dabble. And in the book, we have that run where me and him smoke opium and we're like best of friends. But he his mindset was on ruling the world. He wanted to be the biggest rock and roll band in the world.
Right.
And the rest of us were like, wow, okay, well, let's do it, you know? So, and Slash was very much had a work ethic. So when the band, like if I missed a rehearsal or showed up late or something, he sat me down, man. He's like, look, you know, we've got the opportunity to be in a band. Don't fuck that up too, you know?
Right.
The old Keith Richards expression is, you know, Keith Richards would say, I slept in a chandelier last night and I'm here. What's your excuse? You know, it's like, if you're in the Rolling Stones and you've been given this life to be a Rolling Stone,
yeah,
you don't fuck that job up. So I just tried to be like, if our party and a curricular activity started to take precedent, and I think if you'd ever asked the band, that would be what would happen between me joining that band and obviously being the drummer that replaced Steven, you know, things took precedent and then it caused problems with the band.
I mean, it sounds, on the one hand, I mean, and I can't really tell this from the book, whether Guns N' Roses was an experience you enjoyed or survived.
Well, there was great highlights, but emotionally it was difficult because I was, like I said, and then once you get into an inebriated state and, you know, paranoia and things start to come out, and that started to happen with the excess. And being an A personality, like I spoke about before, there wasn't really a lot that I could say or do that was going to change what we were going to do on a daily basis. So that was difficult for me. Here I was in the band and the guys were cool with me and everyone was great. But, you know, we go on stage and I didn't know what was happening half the time.
Because Axl could go off stage, for example. Axl could stop the show. Was that kind of thing that you're referring to there? You didn't know what was going to happen? Yeah,
I mean, it was tough because, you know, here I was. Obviously, I talk about the excess, but at the same time, I was very professional. And I remember I only had a couple of fuck-ups on the entire Guns N' Roses where I was walk on stage and I'm still wasted from the night before. And that would really piss me off. I was like, wait a minute. How did last night turn into today? But most of the time, I was like, I'm going to have 2 beers and I'm going to do a shot. And that's my show warm-up. And I'm not going to get crazy. And I would play a great show. And that was like, I'm going up, you know, it was like, going up to do a prize fight, you know, you're like, I'm going to fucking kick it. You know, we all be like, yeah. And then after the show is when we would go, okay, now let's celebrate the night.
Right.
And that celebration would end up going into the next morning and we'd sleep all day and get back up on stage and do it all over again. I think the question you were asking was it a good time? And I would say, yes. It was an amazing time. There was so many amazing highs, but there was strange lows. Like I said, it was out of control. 3 different versions of the word control: lack of control, out of control, and what was the other one I said?
I don't think.
There was a lot going on, and it was sort of like, you know, this never-ending tour. It was the longest tour in the history of rock and roll, from what I understand. Still is.
Wow.
I remember going out on the road with Velvet Revolver and went out for 18 months. I said, you guys, we have to go home now. We have to go home. And in my opinion, that long first tour ended that band because we burnt out. We got burnt and we started bickering and they dangled the carrot, meaning, oh, hey, the agent calls and he's back in Beverly Hills at the Peninsula Hotel or the Polo Lounge or wherever the hell he's hanging out going, hey, I got an offer from da-da-da-da-da. You guys can go out for another month. And the money's coming. The money's rolling. And all the powers to be want you to keep going. It's like the manager's making his 10%, 15%. The agent's getting 10. And the business manager, they're all like, get out there, boys. And we're getting hurt out there. And go home, get some rest. But no, we didn't do that. And I think it burns out a lot of bands in the end. If you look at the history of rock and roll, most of their first 2 records are great, and then something goes awry, and you know they start to bicker about finances or whatever happens, and people are tired. And when I don't know about you, but when I get tired, I don't make good decisions.
Right.
I get grumpy. I say stupid shit. It's like makes sense to me. You haven't eaten a home cooked meal in 3 years,
and this is all stuff that presumably you can't be prepared for when you enter the lifestyle, when you step up to the Cult, you step up into Guns N' Roses, you move into Velvet Revolver. You're not prepared for any of that when you're in Hollywood. You move to Hollywood and you're dreaming of what it's going to be like. I presume that's the case.
Yeah, I think so. I happen to be the guy that was in these amazing rock bands with volatility, but now I look back with pride. I wouldn't want it any other way.
Mm.
I look at rock and roll bands I see out there now, and I'm like, well, where is the danger? I'm waiting for that young rock band to come out and just. I remember when I first saw Guns N' Roses, I was like, are these guys for real?
Why?
I'm like, well, when I was in the Cult, we used to sit on the tour bus and GN'R was going up the charts, and I remember thinking, they look like a bunch of, cross between the New York Dolls and got this punk rock thing going on, some edge. Bass player looks like Iggy Pop mixed with, Sid Vicious. And I'm like, but is that for real? And then I joined the band. I'm like, yeah, it is. Right? And then my job was to like step up. I didn't have one fucking tattoo when I joined that band.
He says, holding up his sleeve tattoos.
And they took me down to it's almost like, hey, virgin, what the hell's wrong with you?
So I guess, we've spoken about your time with the Cult and Guns N' Roses, but there is obviously a lot to your story prior to that, which you write about in the book. And you're very open about your upbringing and the fact that your biological father left, I think, when you were around the age of 5. How did that, can you even quantify what impact that had on you as a child?
Yeah, I guess probably internally it made me angry, I talk about it in the book a lot, but for years and years and years, I blamed my mother, It took a toll on me later on in life. And not until I was able to meet my wife, Ace, was I able to say, well, I understand what it was, but I talk about my father in the book. He's still alive. Both my parents are 88 years old.
Mm.
Once you get a little older, you understand that people are just human beings. But when you're a kid, you want everything to be perfect.
Mm.
But in the very sense of the word, I look back at it as, I guess that's who made me who I am. That's what made me who I am, because we all become what we are based on where we come from. And if that was a turbulent household with a stepfather that moved in, it caused a lot of friction that created this guy. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be a drummer, and I wanted to rebel, and I wanted to play rock and roll. And so I look at it with gratitude now. I don't look at it as I used to look at it, which reared its ugly head during the GN'R period, because what I realized during GN'R was a lot of this resentment I had from my childhood drove me. It was a driving force, which I think some people that are very successful will tell you. They've got something to prove, and who are they proving it to? Well, maybe it was my mom or my parents or whatever it was. So when I got to the top of the heap is when I started to struggle. And that all is based back to my childhood. So that's why in the book I lay out what happens in the early years. Mm. But very Anthony Robbins, I went to study with that guy. It would be like, you need to thank your parents. Are you happy with how you came out? I'm like, well, finally. I'm like, shit. Took me like 55 years, but some of us got to go through life and figure it out.
Yeah.
We find that peaceful place that says, I'm okay now. But all that stuff that made me feel that way, I guess it made me a great rock and roll drummer. And I would say that about my singers that I've been with.
Right.
Unfortunately, we lost one of them. Scott Weiland had a lot of demons. And I said this after he passed away to Matt Pinfield. Those demons created the art. If he didn't have those demons, he wouldn't have been that great lyricist or that great artist or that great talent. The guy that was able to get up there and completely let himself go in front of a live audience. The same with Axl. If you look at Axl's upbringing, it was not pretty. And that brings this fierce, energetic frontman that changed the face of rock and roll. He was a guy that could captivate 100,000 people. And I watched him. I was like, oh, that guy. And he was intense. He'd come on stage and wouldn't even look at me some nights. I'm like, whoa, what's going on with him? But once he got out there, you're like, there it is. And that's everything that came from where he came from, Indiana, his upbringing, and that makes greatness.
Sure.
It just does. And if you were to ask any great artist, they all have a similar kind of story. It's like, oh, I grew up and everything was great. And, I woke up in the morning, my mom made me breakfast. And, I went to school and da-da-da-da-da, and I became a guitar player. And it doesn't go down like that. It just doesn't. Slash came up in this really interesting family. His mother was a clothing designer for David Bowie. And he grew up around this Hollywood scene. And he became this very artistic, kind of a quiet guy, quiet kid. who found the guitar as his voice. And I love all that. And you look at all these characters, and you're like, wow, that's cool. And I look at it like that now, see?
Sure.
At the time, I'm like, you just want everything to go like the way you think it should go, but it's not going that way. As you get a little older, I look at my parents differently. I look at the bands I was in differently. I'm like, this is exactly how I was supposed to be.
Right.
It was how I reacted at that time that maybe I wish I could take some of that back. I could be like, well,
That's all learning, isn't it? Hindsight is 20/20. I mean, you're reacting to these situations as they unfold.
Yep. And you're scared. You're younger, you're scared. You're in front of a big audience. You don't know what to do. You're like, shit, maybe I could help alleviate some of the problems. And in the book, I think there's a scene where I go in his dressing room and I talk about me and him sitting down to talk. And we had those moments, where we connected like that because we both, all of us, came from similar upbringings and, divorce and childhood stuff. To be able to connect like that at a younger age is hard for guys.
Sure.
You can't talk like that. You can't be like, hey, man, this is what's going on with me. It just doesn't happen. Now, as you get older, you find yourself in some kind of like room with people going, hey, this is how I'm feeling or whatever. And that's a big step. For guys especially. It's so hard for men to express their emotions and talk about real shit.
And I guess if you look back at those days with Guns on that user illusion tour, do you feel that if you had that ability back then to talk to each other about these things, that the band may have continued as it was?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time it just didn't seem apropos. We tried that with Velvet Revolver. We got in a room and everyone had seen the Metallica movie and we're like, oh shit, let's do that. Let's get a guy, I could be a really good therapist for bands. If they need me in, they can call me because I'd be like, here's what you don't do. Let's just start there. And, you get a bunch of young guys or in a band and all of a sudden people start throwing fame and money at them. And it's like, we've seen the story over and over again. It's like rock and roll 101.
Yeah.
I've seen so many young bands come up and then all of a sudden you kind of just watch it all implode. They have it and then they don't.
Right.
And behind the scenes is the same story. It's like, VH1 behind the music. Remember those?
I do.
It's like, oh my God, not again. It's like, here it goes. Right? Same old story.
Yeah.
Right? And I was on that ride more than once.
When you said that you could be a counselor for bands and you said, here's what not to do, here's number one, what would that be?
You need to communicate. Everyone needs to be heard. Obviously there's pecking orders in bands. Learn the pecking order. Learn your place. Be grateful for your place. Like, I could have sat back there and just been the drummer, and just played drums and kept my mouth shut. But I'm not built that way.
Right.
I'm just not built that way. But I could say to maybe a young drummer, I could say, hey, you're the drummer in this band. Are you happy to be in this band? It's like, yeah. I said, so stay in the band. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, there's not a lot of rock bands out there looking for rock drummers. Number one. From my day, there was more rock bands. You had a little bit more option. Like when I went from the Cult to GN'R and then, I moved around a little bit. But in retrospect, I would love to be in one band. I've looked at my friend Lars, who's been in Metallica forever, and, Trey Cool from Green Day. I'm like, you guys have had the same band for like almost 30 years. What's that feel like? That must feel nice to wake up in the morning. And I remember I felt that way when Velvet Revolver got together. I was like, we can keep this band together. I know we can. And we couldn't. But I wanted it to be a band that lasted. But we fell down those same rabbit holes and we went through the same pitfalls. It was almost like when you're in a relationship with a girl and you get another girlfriend and you do the same shit. You act like the same jerk that you acted in the relationship before. And I had to learn that about relationships. I'm like, I'm the jerk. I better get it together. Right. I have to change. And when I realized that, the light bulb went off. And then luckily I met my wife who was patient enough to let me go through that process. So I would just remember working with Rick Rubin with Velvet Revolver, and he sat us all down. How's everybody getting along? I don't know did you read that part of the book?
I did.
But he's got a lot to be said there.
Sure.
It's like, look, if it's not a good vibe, you're not going to make a good record.
Right.
And that's the truth. And look at the Chili Peppers. Look what he's done with those guys. He's taken that band, especially Flea and Anthony, and they're brothers. Maybe they don't get along all the time, but they understand that they have a great thing. It's like the Rolling Stones. Do Mick and Keith get along? No, probably not. But they understand they have a good thing.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And they've all gone out and tried to do solo records. Right? And they go, I'm going to go back to my day job, the Rolling Stones.
We have to take a break, but don't go anywhere because we'll be back shortly with more from Matt Sorum. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Matt Sorum. We were talking earlier about your upbringing, and you also found drums very early. Was music and with drums something that you saw sanctuary in, given how tumultuous your home life was? Was that where you directed your energies to cope with that?
I mean, I guess so. Subliminally, it was there, right? And I saw Ringo, as I stated in the book, and it just hit me like a thunderbolt. That's what I needed to do. And I think I expressed it in the book. It's like when you're a kid and you see like a train go by, you go, I want to be the conductor of the train. Or a fire engine goes by, I'm going to be a fireman. It was the same sort of thing. I'm like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And it just clicked. And then as soon as I sat down on the drums and started playing them, something connected in me that was a way to get that angst out that I was having. I remember the way I felt afterwards when I would do it. It was like a high, And then when I got good at it, that changed who I was. All of a sudden, I'm Matt the drummer. And people would see me and go, hey, that guy, he's a really good drummer. And then I had an identity. And as any kid, you just want to be identified. You're like, what do you do? I play football. I'm an artist. Or, I have my charity, Adopt the Arts, and I do this program for kids in school. And we did this art project with these kids for Coffee Bean, which is the big coffee stores. And it had all the kids draw art for the coffee bag. Well, these two little boys won and this little girl. And Jane Lynch, she's a big actress, is on my board. She came and we're going to give the award for the top 3 bags. And there was these little boys, they're like 5th graders. And I said, Joseph, you're 2nd place. And he looked around like, me? Like that. And then his eyes lit up. And I saw it. That was me. It was like someone said he was good at something. And he came up and got his award, and the same thing with the other kid. And they were both mischievous little dudes.
Right.
Like in the playground. They were kind of like not great at academics. And they just changed. Like at that moment, they were like, I am an artist.
Wow.
And I've seen it many times. And that's why I do that and give back and have my charity, because I see it. It's like a psychic change. And that's what happened for me. It was a psychic change. I was able to identify and be somebody at a very young age. I was already playing drums in school. Like I said in the book, I bring my snare drum.
Yeah.
And everyone would gather around. They'd watch me,
Yeah.
And we just want to be accepted as humans.
Sure.
And it built me up. My self-esteem was low because of stuff. And I think that built me up. It gave me self-esteem,
And then you took that. I think the first time you went into Hollywood was with what's the name of the band? It was with Prophecy. You ventured to the Starwood in Hollywood to play their Sunday night amateur night. You went there from Orange County. What do you remember of the thrill of being in Hollywood that first night? A legendary venue like the Starwood. Can you even recall how you were feeling?
Oh yeah, it was like I'd walked in through the pearly gates. I've arrived in heaven. This is my destiny. It was like Candyland. It was like, remember that show Vinyl?
Yes.
It was better than that. It was like walking into Max's Kansas City, but like I remember going in and there's a scene where I see Nikki Sixx and it had a band called London.
Yeah.
I remember dressing up and doing my hair and wearing like red pants, and it was a thing. It was like, okay, going out and seeing all the cool luminaries, Rodney Bingenheimer, and seeing all these cool bands, and you just wanted to be in the scene.
Yeah.
And as soon as I could, I moved there. As soon as I could get back to Hollywood, I said, this is my home. And I packed up my Rambler station wagon and headed for Hollywood in 79 and never turned around. I only just sold my house this year, which was the strangest thing. I've been there over 40 years.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm leaving Hollywood,
Yeah.
But Hollywood and the Sunset Strip and all that shit's been gone for a while.
Right.
That thing that I lived is gone. And it's a different world there now. And I was lucky and fortunate enough to be there at the height of it. And I'm talking pre-'80s. Like the '80s, yeah, we know that whole story of Motley Crue and the Sunset Strip. But from about 74, when I started going there, to the mid-'80s that was the pinnacle. The greatest bands, the greatest, coolest people,
Yeah. You must have seen some incredible bands during that period in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I saw Judas Priest at the Starwood in the early days. I saw Devo. I remember when Devo came out.
Right.
Early 80s, and we were all like, what the hell is this? We all went there because it was, there was a lot of local bands that were killer. Tommy and Nicky were in a band called London, and before they formed Motley Crue, and there was a bunch of local bands that were killer. Smile. There was a drummer named Jimmy Volpe that I used to just go watch him. He was like Keith Moon reincarnated. He was like Keith Moon meets John Bonham.
Wow.
And he never became a famous drummer. But man, I don't know what happened to him. But he was great.
Yeah.
And I'd go watch Randy Castillo. We hung out at Madame Wong's West. And I saw the early version of The Police, the Hong Kong Cafe in Chinatown.
Wow.
So people go, hey, there's this band. They're coming from England. I'm like, what do they call it? Police. Oh, what a weird name. We go down there, and there was Sting, young. No one in the club. Like, I saw so many bands like that became big bands.
Did you feel like you fit in? Sometimes if you're in a situation like that, people have to deal with a sense of, am I good enough to be here? Am I good enough to compete with these people? Did you have that sense of confidence that you were?
Well, yeah, as you see in the book, I got my confidence around 15 when I saw Kiss.
Right.
That changed me. I was like, I'm as good as that guy. And you had to be a little bit cocky to get, you couldn't be a wallflower and be, as a drummer, I had to be like, hey man, can you play? I'm like, yeah, I can play. What do you want to play? What kind of drums you play? Oh, I got Ludwig Vistalite. You had to learn how to speak the language. I mean, in those days, I could look at a musician and tell if he was good just by the way he looked.
Okay.
I could look at him and go, what kind of guitar do you play? Guy would say Les Paul. I'd be like, oh, really? What kind of amp? Like that kind of shit.
Okay.
And if they said some wacky guitar, I'd be like, no. Les Paul got a little bit disappeared until Slash brought it back. But
right.
Between Jimmy Page and Slash, there was these guitars called Jacksons.
Yes.
And Charvels.
Yeah.
And they had the funny neck. And I was like, oh, God. But I don't know. I mean, in the book, as you can see, I go through a metamorphosis of morphine just to be in a band because times changed so much. You had to change with them or you were left out. So when new wave music came along in the early 80s, the 70s rock and roll thing kind of died out because punk came and then new wave. So in the early 80s, there was Plimsolls, The Knack, 2020, all those bands in the punk movement. It was kind of like in California, Fear, the Dead Kennedys. That wasn't really my scene. I was always like, I'm a better musician than that.
Right.
I'm not a punk guy. So I went to new wave because it was more musical. And I started playing new wave. And if you see that picture of me with Tori, I got that crazy Flock of Seagulls haircut and shit.
Yeah.
But I had to do it because that was the job. I got to look a certain way. I can't have a long hair and look like a metal dude and be in a new wave band.
Sure.
So you morphed.
Yeah.
And then not until rock and roll kind of started to come back again, which was the mid-'80s, did I start to grow my hair out again. I joined a band called Paris on Polygram, and I had long hair, and I was real skinny. But even then, in the book, I think I talk about when I went to audition, my hair wasn't long enough. The band was like, his hair is too short. And my hair was like here, but it needed to be. Everyone had a look.
It was a different time.
Even the Cult, when I went to join the Cult, Terry Nails, he was a bass player buddy of mine. He says, Matt, wear all black. Get your hair a little straighter. It's too poofy. My hair was like fucking, But in those days, that was good.
Right.
Big was good, So I remember going in wearing all black, and I had like a cross around my neck. It was very gothic. Everything was like prepared in a professional manner. It's like, I'm going in there, I'm going to look right. And all the guys on the street that were doing anything all had like a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like Zakk Wylde, when I first saw him, he was like this Viking gunslinger,
Yeah.
All those great young guitarists.
One of the things which you write about in the book is the fact that it's kind of staggering how close you didn't actually even get to that career in music, because for a brief period of time there, you were running drugs to Hawaii. You were taping cocaine to your body and taking it to Hawaii, and came perilously close to being caught and ending up in jail for what could have been decades. What was this a survival thing at that point? Did you just need the money? Was there something that it triggered in you that made you think I should do this? Was there just a recklessness to it? What propels you to take a risk like that?
I did like the high of it. I was high too, but I liked the rush. I was into adventure. I was always into in those days you could go through you didn't have to go through customs to go to Hawaii, but you could go through security. And there was no electronics. You didn't have to take your clothes off. You didn't have to drop your shoes. There was no bag going through I'm talking, the early 80s. And like I said, I didn't want to have a real job. I knew that. And in my early days, before I got, I was always kind of around cocaine and always around drugs. I grew up in Orange County, and there was a lot of drugs in Orange County. In the early days, right out of high school, I was a pot dealer, and I did that. It was an easy way to make money, and everyone was smoking pot. And I said, I'm not hurting anybody. And then when I met this guy in the book who becomes my counterpart in the smuggling, I take the job based on it was a lot of money, and it was a first-class flight, and I could go to Hawaii, and it didn't seem dangerous to me at the time because I could walk through, get on the plane. Sure, I had a sense of danger. I got to be careful. I'm not going to get high before I get on the plane. I never did because I knew I would be like... Mm-hmm. And there was guys in the airport, and they're still there to this day. They sit up in a box and they'll watch. And I remember seeing them, and I would always be like, hey, I never waved. I didn't wave. I just go through. But yeah, it was twofold. It was a sense of danger. It was adventure. There was a lot going on around it. If you see in the book, there's, it was girls, the party, and it all came with it. And just much like rock and roll, people wanted to be around that guy that had that stuff. And I'm like, wow, I like being that guy. And luckily, I had a good enough intuition that I got out in the nick of time. And I never went back to it.
Right. It's an incredible story. It's an incredible part of an incredible life that you've led.
Well, if you watch the movie Blow with Johnny Depp, mm-hmm. It was the romanticism of all of it. It was very similar to when Johnny in Blow starts as a pot dealer and he gets into cocaine with the allure of money and if you remember, his lifestyle becomes girls. He meets Penelope Cruz and it happened to him and he liked the way that felt. So he just went with it. Mm. And that's exactly what happened to me. I just went with it. But then I realized, thank God, something was watching over me. Somebody was watching over me and said, look, and sent an intuitive thought to me that said, you got to get out.
Sure.
Thank God to this day, I always look at it like, could have gone the other way and I might not be here at all.
Absolutely. Definitely
not in this interview.
That's right. That's right. Matt, just a few more things. I know you have pressing engagements. Just last couple of things. You mentioned you write in the book about collaborating or performing for Phil Spector for a little bit, and you mentioned that Phil says to you at one point that he'd love to meet Axl. He'd love to collaborate with Axl and make a record. What do you think that collaboration would have ended up like, Axl and Phil Spector?
Who knows? Could have been great. Yeah.
Could have been great, for sure.
I remember him saying he wanted to call him. He said, I could make the greatest record ever for you and Axl. And I didn't get him on the phone with Axl. But because after that particular night that I had with Phil, as you see in the book, it was such a wild, I want to do a whole play based around that one, My Night with Phil. And obviously when that horrible murder happened to that young lady, I remember saying to myself, probably did it.
Really?
It was just so scary to see that, because I remember thinking the run-in that I had with him, he was a mad genius, and if you read the book, you'll see that he was obsessed with the OJ trial. And that's how I met him. I met him with Kato Kalin. And there I ended up in this room with all these characters. And he was a court stenographer, and he had all these theories about, that particular trial and everything. And I remember thinking, God, this is very bizarre. And then when it happened to him, I was like, oh my God, this is weird. But I did have that run-in, and I wanted to share it in the book because it was just so bizarre. It was such a bizarre 18 hours of my life.
Right.
And regardless of how you feel about the man, obviously, at the end of his reputation, everything was, he's a murderer, and it's just horrible. But the story that I told was, I met the guy, I recorded with him, and Celine Dion was there. And just another bizarre tale.
Sure.
Really.
Sure.
The characters that I've somehow run across in my life.
That's right. Last two things, Matt. You write very openly about your relationships with Slash and with Duff, with Ian and Billy from the Cult. And I guess in certain times of your relationships with them, perhaps them not being as straight up with you as you would have liked about certain developments with whatever project they were working at the time. Have you had to get to a place in your life where you forgive them for some of that? Is that one of the things that came from writing this book, of getting to a place where you could just write about that but forgive any of those actions?
Oh, yeah. I mean, me and Billy Duffy are still great friends. I talked to Slash, and I spoke to Duff the other day. Me and Duff are like brothers. I mean, I look at it like, especially when you have a family, you start to understand, okay, well, I got to take care of the family. I got to do certain things. So I put myself in his shoes, and I'm like, okay, I can understand, even though, as you see from the book, I explain kind of how I felt the way it went down, and I describe it pretty much how it went.
That's the Guns reunion.
It hurt. I'm not going to lie. Because you go through life and you want people to act a certain way, but sometimes you go, oh shit, I thought it would have been different, but it wasn't. But at the same time, with reflection and healing, I'm able to understand his point of view. And Slash, I never had a problem with Slash, because Slash has always been a character. I've always been like, Slash is the quiet one, So in the book, I describe that. I've always been like, Slash is kind of, but he's a smart guy. I say this to a lot of musicians. I say, look, there's two things. There's music and there's a band, and then there's the music business. And once you learn the music business and you're a guy that's had a career, you kind of got to take care of business. And Slash is a guy that takes care of business. And I don't have anything to say about Slash other than he takes care of business. And Billy Duffy and me are really good friends. And we actually, this book helped us a lot. He talked through this with me. Ian, a guy that I was in a band with that I think was one of the great frontmen. And I do say that I think he could have been a bigger frontman and a bigger band. And I truly believe that in my heart. And I felt that about Scott Weiland as well. I was like, God, I wish I could just shake him and tell him how great he is. But he can't act like another guy. He's just that guy, But then you work with guys like Steven Tyler, who play all the politics of, like, I got to go meet the radio guy. I got to go kiss some babies. I got to do this. And he's this bigger than life personality who does the business, right? Like Slash. There's other guys in music that don't know how to do that. They can just be the singer, and they're difficult at times. So those are the points where I had in the book where I talk about Ian, like, Ian, dude, let's go. But then again, now I look back at the band and I go, fuck, that was a cool band. And it still is cool. And so Ian didn't give a fuck, really.
Yeah.
He just wanted to fucking do it. He didn't want to go, oh, we're going to go do this because we're going to be mainstream. We're going to do this. No, we're the Cult. So I look at it in a lot of different ways now.
Sure.
I'm like, well, at the time, it was frustrating. And, Scott, Like, why don't let's do this and this and this. In my mind, I'm like, if we just did this, we could go there. But Scott and he was fucking great though.
Yeah.
It was great. I wish he was fucking still here. I'm like, I'd call him right now.
Yeah.
And go, what are we going to do? You know, how's the drug use? You know, let's, how you feeling? I was always hoping he'd grow out of it.
Yeah.
That's what I hoped. It was like when he passed and Duff called me. Duff was the first one to call me when Scott passed. I remember thinking, fuck, I thought he was going to grow out of it. And that's the problem. If you don't grow out of it, it bites you in the ass and it takes you down.
Yeah.
And that's happening a lot of great guys.
Yeah. Last question. Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people you give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
Yeah, the first guy that inspired me was my music teacher. And I talk about it in the book. His name was Terry Newman. And I remember that, and it's what I talked about with kids that I work with. Terry was my music teacher in high school. And he pulled me aside one day, and I was about 16 years old. And I was a little, like, listening to rock and roll. I had an afro. And he pulled me aside and he said, you know, Matt, I wanted to be a professional musician. I wanted to be a professional touring. And out of all the students I've taught, you've got it. You've got the gift. You can do this. Because he knew I was already heading up to Hollywood. I'd already gone up there and snuck out on the weekends. I told him about it one time or something. And he says, you need to go for it. And that was it. Here was this guy that I really looked up to as one of the greatest teachers I ever had. Musician, great musician, and an adult that said, go for it. Mm. So I give major props to him, and he's already got a gold record on his wall. I sent it to him years ago. Right. Platinum, actually. Yeah, and he was at my wedding.
Nice.
So he's probably my biggest inspiration.
Nice one. Matt, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you and hear about all your stories in your life.
Okay, cool, man. Well, thanks so much for having me, and see you down under at some point, I hope.
I hope so too. And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Matt for his time, and thank you for listening. Just a reminder that Matt's memoir, Double Talkin Jive, True Rock and Roll Stories from the drummer of Guns N' Roses, The Cult and Velvet Revolver, is out now. If you have any feedback on the show or suggestions on who you'd like me to interview, or even if you just want to say hello, please drop me a line at humansofmusic@jaxsta.com. That's humansofmusic, one word, at Jaxsta, JAXSTA.com. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to Jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.